Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord. Welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Day's a little busy. They decided to drop 2 banners around similar times. I was going to do a regular Shiny Review, but then I was like, oh yeah, you gotta wait for MSC as well. So, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting, of course, with Asahi. So, Asahi is a pure visual unit. I also can't decide if this is technically SSR7 or SSR8. Apparently, according to game files, MSC cards follow the same numerical values that all the other SSRs do. So technically this is SSR8, but I think in terms of theme, we can probably refer to this as SSR7. So, pure visual unit, she has single target appeals. As you can see, they raise your visual by not a ton, but there's a lot of active buffs going on. So the first one gives you visual 10% for 5 turns, 4 turns, 3 turns, links into a visual 50% for 5 turns, and 20% for 2 turns. Similar deal with the 4-star appeal, 20% up for 5, 4, 3 turns, and then link appeal into visual 50 for 5 turns, visual 20 for 2. The idea is that almost all of Asahi's passives have to do with the number of visual up buffs you have. Her 2-star passive requires 3 or more, and her 4-star passive requires 5 or more. So just by link appealing with any one of her appeals, you will have both of those passives live, which is pretty nice. They have good activation chance at 20%, and they both can activate at least twice, with the 4-star passive being up to 3 times. Her memory appeal is thankfully pretty alright. It's a visual 2 that fortifies visual buffs that follows up with a second visual 2 that fortifies visual buffs, making it pretty strong if you already have a ton of visual buffs active. So I can't say for certain if MSC Asahi is going to drastically warp visual Straylight. I think she is a very interesting card, to say the least, and is overall really solid in terms of overall design. I think this card is nice. In fact, maybe even just a little better than nice. So I would say she's in that very easy A+, definitely in the S to S- range as well. So I think this card has a lot of really good potential. It's just going to have to see if players are able to make the most of it. Next up, we then have Hiyori. So, Hiyori is a pure vocal card, and her whole point is to play off of what Vocal Illumine has been doing for a little bit, which is raising passive skill activation. Notably, her appeals raise it by either 5% or 20%, which is okay, to say the least. As for passives, most of them are kind of fine. The 2-star passive is a pretty hefty vocal 130% up, but you need the passive up buff to activate it, which means you more or less have to use one of her appeals or any of the Illumine that follow similar practice, more or less, making it a pretty tricky appeal to use, as passive up isn't going to be used by a ton of cards. I could see this maybe working on a vocal leader, just to further amplify the chance of you activating leader passives, and then you just get a free 130% vocal. That is an option. Even though it is 10%, it'll at least be, if you're using the other appeal, maybe 30% plus a little extra. So I think it seems pretty feasible. You also have the vocal 100% up if you're in the vocal position, which is kind of cool. Her 1-star passive is going to be tricky for most people to use, as this is the Vocal Illumine passive because it requires Mono and Meguru in your skill history, which also gives you a 10% buff to your memory gauge. So this passive you probably won't be using unless you're playing Illumine. The other two you can probably make work. Vocal 130%, again, I think sounds really interesting for leader if you do decide to use her appeal, while the Vocal 100% up is great if you're just building a vocal unit straight up. As for her masteries, she has a couple of them that are sort of interesting. She has Unit Mastery SP, which is this level 12. That is at level 70 when it maxes out, but you also have level 8 at 65 and level 4 at 50. She has Unit Mastery Stamina, which goes up to +4 at level 80, and it's +2 at level 65. Vocal Stay Mastery, which goes up to level 3 at level 70, or it's +2 at level 10. So you're not missing out on a ton if you don't manage to get 2 extra copies of her. The last one is Vocal Mastery Vocal Limit Up. That goes up to +6 at level 80, it's +4 at 65, and +2 at 30. So realistically, her best place to be is at 2 stars. Then you don't really get that much of a power up at 3 stars, but you get a pretty decent one at 4 stars. So if you are aiming for multiple copies of Hiyori, getting 3 is your best bet. I think the card is okay. She's a little underwhelming in some aspects. I think her masteries are slightly weaker than what we would expect from a limited, especially considering that we have a permanent Hiyori SSR that has slightly better masteries for most players. She's extremely reliant on those passes to make her useful, and because it's so split across where you want to necessarily be using them between Vocal Illumine, Leader, and Center, she can feel a little underwhelming, but I don't think she's bad, to say the least. So I'm going to give her an A-. I think she is still very good. It's just going to be a little tricky using her compared to a lot of other limited cards. Now, my songs collection. Starting things off with Juri. Juri is a pure vocal unit and has mixed AoE and single target. So as we can see here, you have the vocal 2 followed by a vocal 1.5, and you have vocal 3 followed by a vocal 2. The higher values are the single target, while the lower values are the AoE. You'll also see underneath them that they have double duet, but the other interesting thing is that Juri has a plus appeal, although the plus appeal is okay at best. It requires your full Hokura lineup, and it has to be turn 4 or later, and it's a vocal 1. I feel like they could have done anything else with that other than a vocal 1, but hey, at least this means they're trying plus appeals on Hokura, which is something that we've been kind of looking forward to. Passive-wise, she's pretty alright. A vocal 40% up is not the worst thing in the world, but you're probably not grabbing it, since the bar standard for a lot of limb teams is 50%. She has a vocal 75% as long as you have 1 attention up buff at least, with a 25% chance to activate twice, which is cool. Then you have a vocal 120% up at 4 stars, which requires the full Hokura lineup, and it has to be turn 3 or later. And that's 20% chance to activate twice. That's pretty good. Decent amount of vocal uncap, reaching at least 250. And then her memory appeal is probably the most appealing part of this card for vocal Hokura, as it is an unconditional vocal 3 into another vocal 3 on link appeal. This makes it actually stronger than Choco 5's memory appeal, which was a conditional vocal 5 that required a bunch of attention up to make it really strong. So, if you are looking for a center for vocal Hokura, this new Juri is actually a fantastic selection for that. Now, as for what I would grade her, I would say that she's in the A- range as a unit. I don't think Double Duet is still very good. It is incredibly high rolly and expects a lot of luck in order to make it really useful. But the rest of her kit, from her passives to her memory appeal, are really solid. So I would say as a center, she's great, S+ easily. Very strong, is going to be relevant for vocal Hokura if they continue to get support, which, considering they love to do stuff in waves, I feel like we're going to get a bunch of vocal Hokura stuff going forward. So, good card. And then lastly, we have Madoka. And I'll get to the animations, don't worry. For Madoka, she is another pure vocal unit. She is purely single target as well, so not having the AoE can kind of hurt depending on your setup. The damage is about what you'd expect, a 3.5 and a vocal 5. What's interesting, though, is that she has first evasion, so they're bringing back the evasion strategy for vocal Nocchill, but the new effect that Madoka has, which you can see as they has the 1, is an increase to mulligans, or to discards. If you're completely unfamiliar with the term, mulligans have been in other kinds of games. You'll hear it in card games every so often. The idea is that when you are in Fess, if you are running a full team, so if you're running, say, all of Nocchill, you have access to 1 mulligan. If you're playing Illumine, you have 1 mulligan. If you're playing Antika or Hokura, you have 2 mulligans, which is you take an appeal, you discard it, and you draw a new one. You can do this at any point, but you have a limit as to the number you have. Madoka's whole thing is that once you appeal, you get an additional mulligan. So if you feel like your starting hands are kind of bad in terms of what appeals you draw, Madoka on a full team can absolutely make that work out well for you. It's kind of cool. I don't know how strong it's going to be in the grand scheme of things, but it is cool to experiment with it at least. Her passives are all evasion focused. Her 2-star passive requires the full Nocchill lineup, and that's it for vocal 75% and 50% evasion. The vocal 100% as well as 30% evasion requires at least one or more evasion up active buffs. That has a 20% chance to activate twice, as does the vocal 75%. So that one's pretty cool. Her memory appeal is not amazing. It's a vocal 50% buff until you take damage that follows up with a vocal 4. This is weaker than the current vocal center for vocal Nocchill, which is Madoka 2, if I recall correctly. So, on that merit, Songs Collection Madoka does not beat Madoka 2. In fact, I would say you use My Songs Collection Madoka if you are planning to not really play Nocchill like that. If you don't plan on using her passives and decide to really invest into this card, the cool part is that the link appeal for her 4-star appeal only needs Toru. So if you're building, say, Illumine, you can run Illumine alongside this Madoka and Toru in order to get the vocal 5, get the 40% evasion for 3 turns, and you would still get access to a pretty good passive. So there is some interesting experimentation here. I think Madoka is good, but it is a little frustrating that she does feel a bit weaker than Madoka 2, which is very funny considering how long it's been since Madoka 2 was released. There is some application for running Madoka 2 as a leader in Vocal Nocchill, but then you're kind of up in the air for if they have a center that's worth running. So we'll have to see if Vocal Nocchill gets another center that could make this Madoka work a lot better as a leader. Animation-wise, since we're here on My Songs Collection, I'm a big fan of Juri's. I'm a sucker for when they decide to do the flashback style of animations. So it's cool to see the contrast between early Juri versus late Juri, and how her character has drastically changed in a lot of ways. It's nice to see the growth. Madoka's is, to me, just kind of funny. Just, wow, she's at the convenience store and you just bump into her. Or maybe it's just that you're waiting on her because she's getting water. I think it's fine. The fest animation for Juri, I think, is pretty cool. Again, I'm a big fan of the fact that they've been using a lot more 3D assets and are doing well at blending them. Like, you can tell that Juri's arm there is a bit of a 3D asset as it comes forward. I mean, everything here that's flying off is 3D. It's nice. There's a real energy to it that I'm a big fan of. I really do appreciate the simplicity of Madoka's that decides to get really in-depth the second you start watching it. There's a lot of cool energy that's going on with this one. The brief smile that you get when she thinks about something. What could it be? That's for you to figure out. But yeah, I think this card is also visually very nice. I think both of these cards really do nail their aesthetic. I do wonder if they paired these two specifically because they're playing an instrument, which is probably the whole point, but that's fine. And then lastly, we have Asahi. Her fest animation, I think, is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of this design. It's incredibly goofy. Although, I will say for this animation specifically, there's a couple assets that look really fuzzy, and some of it looks intentional, the other doesn't. Especially when you watch the animation here for the chibi. That bubble gets really low quality as it gets bigger. I feel like they just had an asset, but then were like, well, we could redraw it to be a little cleaner, but we're not going to do that. This one's also really cool. I'm a big fan of how this card turned out visually. There's a lot of cool emphasis that I think 2018 Shiny could have never pulled off. I'm glad that they're really getting strong with their use of Spine. Since there is some confusion if they're using Spine or Live 2D, it has been confirmed for a very long time they use Spine. But I think this card really does showcase how well they're doing animations now. Anyway, enough rambling from me. That's it for the video. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know, and I'll do my best to continue providing Shiny Colors content as I can. I know the game has been a little rough to me personally, a little bit, and I've had my grievances with some of the decisions in the last few months, but I will keep doing it until I'm absolutely fed up with it. And when that time comes, you'll probably know. So, till the next video, let's look forward to whatever comes next. I've been Cho, and again, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day.